That's my theme song today. Oh Lord, how I need you. I was in the first service when we were singing that song. I was reminded of a dream I had a month or so ago. And you know, most of the time dreams just kind of fade away in a few seconds after you wake up, and you know that you had this funny dream or weird dream, but it's gone, it evaporates. But this dream has not yet gone away. And there were lots of weird things in that dream. But I was in a large auditorium, and I stood up to speak. I don't even know what it was about. I don't even know if it was church. It might have been, I don't know. But as I stood up in front of this group, I noticed that people were getting up and leaving, but they had to leave by walking down in front of me. And I thought, they're upset. They're upset that I'm speaking. But as they came by me, they looked up and smiled, and they all seemed happy enough, and it was just really strange. And so I began to speak, and my notes were on note cards that were just like 2x2 cards. And so I was holding this card with these notes on it and thinking, oh my goodness, I should have printed this bigger. But as I began to speak and looking at this little tiny itsy bitsy note card, the letters on that note card began flaking off and falling on the floor. And so then I was kind of left to figure out what it was I was going to be speaking about, which just, that evaporated too. I thought, as we sang this song, oh Lord, I need you. I have it written down on paper, and the letters are not coming off. So, will you pray with me? Father, I'm so grateful that we have opportunity to come and worship, and these songs of worship that have reminded us again of how worthy you are to be praised, and how much we do need you, and how much you interact in our lives, and I'm thankful for that. And so I pray as we consider your word today and consider this message that you will give understanding and wisdom and strength for us to even know what to do with it. We thank you and praise you in your holy name. Amen. This is the growing season, and we've been focusing for the last 6 weeks. Can you believe it? Is it 6 weeks already? We're not even halfway through this little gig that we're doing here while Ken and Teresa are away. But we've been focusing on the teachings of Jesus in John 14 through 16. And I think many of you have been reading the little books, Secrets of the Vine. And hopefully you're even taking advantage of the little devotional journal that we've given you and reading those each day. The advantage to that is that it does help us to make space to sit and to listen to what God is saying to us. And even though I helped put those together and read those verses initially, there's something so powerful about doing it one by one each day and hearing what God has to say. Today's verse was from Joshua, which I really needed to hear. And because I told Gil when I came out in the living room this morning, I said, I'm not doing this again. This is it. We're done. Because I don't mind teaching at women's retreats, and I don't mind doing a lot of things, but somehow standing in front of this congregation is terrifying. But God said today, don't be afraid. I'm with you. So I'm taking it at his word. That's why it's important to read that little journal and follow it. If you haven't picked it up, there are more copies there, and there will be a new one in July. In front of us, we have some of the plants that we've been dealing with, and this is the plant, of course, the kids in the service 6 weeks ago planted the seeds for the wheat. This is one that I did at home because I was really nervous about whether that one would grow, and I felt like I needed a little backup, and that's kind of the way I am about gardening. You know, it's a gamble for me, a big one. Anyway, this is the kids, this is ours, and they've been growing happily on our patio. All of these plants actually have been outside, including the grape plant, which is growing. And they went through the hailstorm. They've been through lots of wind. I mean, things have been tough, but but they're growing and they're thriving and they're actually getting stronger as a result of being in not such good conditions. And so I was thinking about how when I plant things, I hope for them, and I wait for them to produce. This little plant is a pepper plant, and it actually has some little green peppers on it, which gives me hope, because I bought it with peppers on it. So, chances are I can't ruin it. But I pray over it, but I can't eat those peppers yet because they're not ripe. They're not mature. They're actually going to be yellow, so I'll know when they're done, or ripe. Done maybe isn't the word. Anyway, I've been thinking a lot for the last couple of months, really, about the waiting and the hoping that goes in to the process of growing and being on the vine, the branches on the vine, and that there is waiting involved. And in doing that, in thinking about that, I remembered a time a few years ago when Gil and I were downtown Boise on a Saturday for the Saturday market. And we were walking along, and I noticed a little table off to the side with some really interesting fabric kind of things. There were some clothing and other wall hangings and things, obviously from a culture not our own. And I walked over to the table looking at those things and actually talked to some of the people involved in those projects. Along with the fabric pieces that were there was a stack of books. I picked up one of the books, and it said, "Waiting, Voices in Transition." And I flipped the book open, and I read this. Whoops. And I bought the book because I was so struck by this. Being a refugee is about three things. It's about a flight from violence and disruption. It's about the wait, sometimes for years, for a new homeland. And it's about the hope for opportunities to build a new and safer life. As I was standing there on the street that day and reading this, I was struck by these words because, yes, I think this is an amazing description of a refugee's life. But I realized it was also an amazing description of our lives living in this world. That in a sense, we are all refugees because we are people who have been driven from the Garden of Eden, that safe place, that place where we had an unbroken connection with God. We've been driven from the garden. And that we're living in a kind of refugee camp on this earth, on this planet Earth. And this refugee camp is ruled by the prince of the power of the air, by God's enemy, Satan. He's the one responsible for the violence and the destruction and the disruption in our camp. The truth is, this world is not our home. We're living here. Gil often uses the scripture from Corinthians where Paul talks about our bodies are tents, and our tents wear out and they get holes in them, and that's, I'm beginning to understand that scripture. It was never intended. Our bodies in this world aren't going to last. God intends for us to have everlasting life, but it can't be in this refugee camp that we're in. I think it's difficult to even begin to comprehend what it is like to live in a refugee camp. I haven't, but I decided to Google that and to kind of look at some of these camps, and it's amazing, first of all, how many camps, refugee camps, there are in the world right now in the year 2017. And the difficulty that exists for these people living in the camp. And there are children who were born in these camps, who have spent their entire life in these camps, and that's all they know. And I wonder, how do these people, how do these children view the rest of the world? What does hope look like for them? Could they even possibly understand what life was like for their parents before the wars that drove them from their countries? It's a fascinating thing. Overcrowded conditions, despair, anger, resentment that exists so often among these people. If there are schools, they're very often overcrowded. Many children can't even attend. There's little or no employment. I just can't imagine living like this year after year after year. How does hope exist? The only thing that they hope for is that someday they will be granted a visa to another country. Hope. It hasn't happened yet, but they're still hoping. And I thought about these refugees living in some cases, tents, in some cases, thrown together structures that are a little bit better than a tent, but nevertheless very primitive. And I thought about these people, and I thought about how all of us are in a kind of waiting place. We're in a waiting room. And you know what a waiting room is. If you go to the doctor, you wait in the waiting room, and you wait until somebody comes through the door and calls your name, and you go back and you get to hear whatever is wrong with you, or whatever is right about you, or whatever it is, or maybe treated for whatever we need to be treated for. If you go to the DMV, you go in there and you get a number and you sit and you wait some more, and you wait some more, and pretty soon your number gets called. Waiting usually results in some kind of service that we receive, or some answers to a question, or some problem solved at the end of the waiting period. But it's difficult, waiting. Waiting is not an easy thing. I remember a number of years ago, well, our boys were really little, so it was a lot of years ago, and the boys and I, Jeff and Kevin, were waiting in the car for Gil, who had gone off someplace, I don't know, and he was gone a long time, but we waited and we waited, and Jeff, who was 3 years old, let out a huge sigh, and he said, "Waiting takes such a long time." And I just think of that often. Yes, waiting takes a long time. And so we're waiting. We're waiting for a lot of things. We're in our waiting room. We are waiting and we're waiting. We wait to grow up if you're a child. You wait to be able to do what your big sister or your big brother does if you're a kid. You wait, as you grow up to find a spouse. You wait to have children. You wait till the children are gone away from home. You wait to find a job or a career, and then you wait sort of impatiently till you retire. And you wait for medical tests. You wait for our bodies to heal. You wait for the next paycheck. You wait for your kids to graduate. You wait for your teenagers to like you again. You wait for problems to be resolved. You wait for your house to sell. You wait for a house to buy. You have all of these waiting things. You wait for your broken hearts to mend. We might be waiting for the day when we can be out of a very difficult relationship. We wait and we wait and we wait. We wait for a phone call, or we wait for the next available operator. We wait for our kids to come home. We wait for the weather to change, and then we wait for the weather to change back again. We wait for the pain and grief of loss to lessen. We wait for our son or our daughter to return. We wait for renewed and healed relationships. We wait for all kinds of things. We wait in traffic. We wait for our prayers to be answered. We're waiting. This is what our life seems to be about, is waiting. I wait for my tomato plants to grow. What are you waiting for? What is it that's in your life? What are you waiting for? And I keep thinking about how we wait, but we hope. We wait and we hope. So we wait for our kids to grow up. We wait for our kids to finally realize maybe that they do have a mom and dad who loves them. We wait, but we hope. And that those things are so closely related. In Spanish, I love it that the word wait and hope is exactly the same word, esperar, wait and hope. We complicate things in English. We have two words, and we don't know for sure whether we're waiting or hoping, but in Spanish it's the same word. The interesting thing to me about these two words, and in Hebrew also, they really are very closely related. They're very similar. In Hebrew, there's kind of this nuance in the word wait. There's also the suggestion that wait involves the word hope, and part of the word hope is there. In the word hope includes the idea that time has to go by before it's accomplished. So we have expectations of something to come, and so built into hope is the knowledge that wait time is involved. I like to think that hope and wait are like fraternal twins. You know, they have the same parents, and their parents might be called trust and confidence. It occurred to me that if you don't have hope, what would your children, if you don't have trust and confidence, what would the parents' names be? Because then their kid's name would be despair or something. But trust and confidence gives birth to hope. And wait is right there with it. Wait is an interesting word because wait is kind of like hope in action. Wait is what's happening while we're waiting for what we hope for to be delivered. And I think an example of that is of a farmer. The farmer tills the ground, and then he plants the seeds, he plants the wheat. And then he waits for the rains to come. And then he waits for the seeds to germinate and begin to grow. And then he waits some more while they grow, and he waits some more while they grow. And he does this because he hopes for a crop. And I think it's no wonder that we call farmers gamblers also, because they don't know if he's going to get a crop. He doesn't know, because the reality is that a lot of things can happen, and he may not get a crop, or he may have a diminished crop, or the hail may destroy the crop, or something. But he's waiting and hoping. And I like to wait and hope too, because I love tomatoes. I love to make things with tomatoes. We grow mostly tomatoes in our little garden area. And Gil and I, it looks like this bed is on its end, but it's really not. Gil and I went shopping for our tomato plants, and because I'm not a great gardener, I don't buy tomato seeds. I want to plant, and it's really important for me to look at that little tag that comes with the plant. And I never buy a plant that says it matures in 78 days. If it doesn't mature in 50 days, I'm not interested, or close to it. Because I want those plants to produce as quickly as they can. And so actually, this is our tomatoes last year, and we still didn't have any ripe tomatoes even at this point. So there was more waiting involved. I want tomatoes, I want this 2 days after I plant the plants. I don't wait very well. I want things to happen. But the reality is, those tiny little plants that we planted could never have produced the crop that I wanted, or that I looked for, that I hoped for. They had to grow, they had to get stronger, they had to mature in order for us to have the crop that we hoped for. I was getting a little tired of tomatoes, by the way, before the season ended. But I wouldn't say that, though, out loud, would I? But waiting is a part of that. We wait for things to mature. We wait for things to grow, and we hope. Now, it's interesting because I hope my tomato plants survive. I hope they make it. They're really bigger than this now. I hope that my kids grow up to follow Christ. I don't know that they will. I don't know that my tomato plants are going to survive, because they could be killed by disease or hail or anything else. I don't know that my kids are going to make the right choices. I don't know. I can say I hope we have enough money to go on vacation this year, and even though, we might work really hard to sock away enough money to go on vacation, we don't know what's going to happen. Our car may break down. We may have other huge expenses. We may lose our job, Or we might need a new roof on our house, which we do. But we're going on vacation. Anyway, that's another miracle, by the way. But anyway, we never know for sure about these things because hope in this physical world always carries with it doubt. There's always, when we say hope when we say hope in this world, it always includes all kinds of variables, all kinds of possibilities for it not happening. And so we sometimes get kind of messed up when we read about hope in the Bible because in the Bible, whenever you read about hope in God or hope that God gives us, it's without question a solid, sure thing to happen. That it's based on truth. It's based on the truth about who God is. It's based upon God's unchangeable character. And I just think that's so exciting because that's one thing we can rely on. I can't be sure of anything in this world. I can't hope that something's going to happen and be absolutely certain of it in this physical world. But with God, that's not true. We're told that he will never leave us nor forsake us. It's true. We're told that his compassions never fail. That's true. His mercies are new every morning. We can bank on that. His forgiveness removes our sins from us. We know that's true. That's God's promise to us. God's faithfulness is true, and it's great. His plans for us are good. He's told us that. It's true. He's our provider. He's just. And on and on and on. When we read about God's character, we know it's true. So when God gives us a hope, we can believe in it because it's not based on some little wobbly, maybe it will and maybe it won't, that we experience in this world. Hope, as we're told in Hebrews 11, is faith being sure. It says faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we cannot see. So hope is simply an expectation that though we don't even see it right now, it will appear. It will happen. It will come to pass. When Jesus said, I'm going to prepare a place for you and I'll come again, that's a certainty. That's a sure thing. Faith is based on hope. We know that when God says something, even though we can't see it, it's true. In the 11th chapter of Hebrews, there's a long list of what we call heroes of the faith, people in the Old Testament who are all commended for their faith. And the reason that they're commended for their faith is because every one of them believed what God told them and told them would happen and come about, but none of them saw it happen in their lifetime. That's an amazing thing to me, that they managed to have that much faith. I'm astounded sometimes at my lack of faith, but I just am amazed that these people could hold on and believe because God said it, that it would happen. And when you read in Hebrews, that's one of the things we're assured of, is that all of those people believed without having seen it accomplished, but the writer of Hebrews said, and it did come about. God did send his son. All of these things came just as God promised, even though they couldn't see it. I want to take a few minutes and talk to you about 3 people who I believe were in waiting rooms. In fact, a whole lot of people in the Bible had their own little waiting room, some of them bigger than others for sure, but they were there, and I'm just going to use 3 of them. The first one that I want to talk about is Job, and most of you know about Job. Job was an amazing man when you read about him. He was going about his life. He didn't expect to be in anybody's waiting room, I'm sure. He was just going about his life. He was a wealthy man. He was a blessed man. He had a wonderful family. He was married to a good woman. He had a great house. He had lots and lots of animals, camels and sheep and all kinds of stuff. I mean, he was the envy of the neighbors. Everybody knew Job. Everybody knew what a good man Job was. But God had a plan for Job that he didn't know about, and he certainly wouldn't have picked that plan for himself. The Bible tells us that God had a conversation with his enemy, Satan, and Satan was challenging a little bit and said, Job, I mean, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he trust you? Why wouldn't he believe in you? Why wouldn't he have faith in you and confidence in you? I mean, you've given him all these blessings. Look at him. He's wealthier than anybody around. He has everything he could ever want. You take that away, and he won't bless you. He will be angry at you. And God said, nope, you don't know Job. And so we know the story then is that 24 hours later, Job went from the most admired man to probably the most pitied man. His herds of camels and donkeys and sheep were destroyed. His servants were killed. His 7 sons and 3 daughters died when their home collapsed in what the Bible refers to as a ferocious wind, because I think the word tornado or hurricane hadn't quite come about then. But that began Job's residence in a waiting room. And it was not a comfortable waiting room. It was a miserable place. He had boils, and he not only had boils, but he had friends who probably were worse than the boils, who came and they began to talk to him and lecture him about how if he just would confess whatever sin it was he had, that he could get healed and he would be better off, and that he was deluding himself to think that he hadn't brought this on himself. I mean, friends like that really make waiting in a waiting room pleasant, right? But that was his experience. The next one I want to talk about is David, and you know about David. David was chosen to be king when he was just a teenager, a young man. Samuel, who was a prophet, was told by God to go to this family and to select the next king. And he told Samuel, I'll tell you which one it's going to be. So he got to the family, and you can just imagine the father's pride as he hauled in his sons and big strapping boys and brought them in and lined them up and said, okay, which one is it going to be? They're all fine sons. Samuel went down the list, he looked at them, and he said, no, it's none of these. Don't you have another son? Well, yeah, we do, but he's just a kid, and he's out in the field taking care of the sheep. And Samuel said, bring him in. Brought him in, and Samuel knew that this is the one God had chosen. So that's how he started out. I'd like to think of David's waiting room as being mobile, because he spent years and years and years before he ever got to be king on the run, running from the deranged King Saul. I wonder sometimes, did he question whether that message from Samuel was accurate? That God had chosen him to be king? It didn't feel like it when he was on the run. In fact, he probably thought less about being king than he did trying to stay alive. It was a rough life that he lived. It was tough for him. But David had to keep running. He had to keep running. And while he was running, he was writing praises to God. But he also wrote some laments too. The third one I want you to consider is Jeremiah. Jeremiah lived at a time about 600 years before Jesus' birth. And he was called to be a prophet. And being called to be a prophet was not a popular, wonderful thing to be. So if you got called by God to be a prophet, it might be one of those things that you would just, go into mourning over, because being a prophet was not popular. First of all, you were obligated to speak the words that God gave you to speak. But God wasn't just speaking to you. He gave you a message to give to somebody who needed to hear those words. And in many cases, he gave them to the king. So the king of Israel, King Jehoiakim, was the recipient of a message that God gave to Jeremiah. King Jehoiakim, the whole Israel nation, had rejected God as their God, had decided that they liked the multiple God thing better, and were living pretty horrible lives. And he told Jeremiah to go to the king and warn him that God was going to destroy their city, in the city of Jerusalem. And he was bringing about some horrible devastation upon the land. It wasn't a pleasant message to deliver. So sure enough, he got the message to King Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim was so upset, so angry that he put him in jail. So while he was in prison, I mean, it was sort of like, you know, you get the message and shoot the messenger. He was very upset, and wanted to be rid of this prophet of God. Well, that was only one of the things that he struggled through. But in the 3rd chapter of Lamentations, which is written by Jeremiah, and a lament is that cry of our hearts that just says, oh, why, oh God, why me? That crying out to God in the misery of it. So here he is walking through the streets of Jerusalem in the devastation of this beautiful city, this city that was the holy city that set apart by God. He was walking through the streets crying out. But the pain of that experience was so great on his heart that he began to talk about Israel and talk about Jerusalem as if it was he himself who represented Israel, himself who represented Jeremiah. So he writes this in the first person. There's even a verse in there that says something like, he says to God, I think that there's a target on my back and you are shooting arrows at it. This is the kind of desperateness he felt. He felt so under God's condemnation because he took on the pains of the whole nation. It was a hopeless, miserable situation. Well, those are 3 guys in a waiting room. But I got to ask you, what's your waiting room? What are you waiting for? What is it that you're struggling with? What is happening in your life that makes you feel like God's maybe against you? Or makes you feel like there's no hope? There's nothing to look forward to. Maybe it's despair you're feeling. And how long have you been in this waiting room? And are you feeling stuck, like the door's locked and you can't get out? Well, the interesting thing is that Job, David, and Jeremiah all had 3 things in common. They had terrible troubles. They had laments. They were grieving for various reasons. And they didn't know, secondly, when their troubles would end. It wasn't like God said, well, you know, if you can sit there, Job, for 40 days and scratch the boils, it's going to end. He didn't know when it would end. He had no idea when it would end. And it wasn't just the boils, but it was the grief he was going through. And the third thing, believe it or not, is that all 3 of these guys ended up expressing their hope in God. Jeremiah seems to have leapt from kind of a pit of despair to a pinnacle of hope. It's an amazing thing because we read the despair in Lamentations, and especially in chapter 3 of Lamentations. But we also are very familiar with chapter 29 of Jeremiah, where in that chapter, you know it because we often quote that, and it's often people's favorite verse, where he quotes God. God says to him, Jeremiah, I have plans for you. I have plans for the nation of Israel, and my plans for you are good. They're not to prosper, they're to prosper you and not to harm you. They're to give you a hope and a future. That's a verse we cling to because we understand that what's true about God in his relationship to Israel is true for us as well. God says, if you call on me, if you seek me, if you come and pray to me, and I'll listen to you. Seek me with your whole heart. Make it the most important thing you do. I will hear you. I will be found by you. I am not in hiding. I am there where I can help you. And then he ends up by saying to Jeremiah, I will bring you back from captivity. Job had no idea what would happen to him. And in the midst of a very painful and a shameful waiting room, really, he said these words. And he said these words to his friends who wanted him to doubt and question everything that was happening. He said, I know that my Redeemer lives. And one day he will stand upon the earth. I know my Redeemer lives. In spite of what's happening to me, I know it. I know it with my whole heart. Somewhere, sometime, he will deliver me. I know that. And then there's David, who, writing while he was in his mobile waiting room, also said, when he was really at one of his lowest points, and reading the Psalms is fascinating to me because we read David's praises, but we also read his laments, and we identify with those laments. But in chapter 40 of Psalms, he says, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God." You know, these stories of Job, David, and Jeremiah, and Habakkuk, and a few others that we know, really are relevant to us because they're often our laments as well. Why is this happening to me? Why did this happen to me? Why can I not find peace? What's happening? And Jesus told us in chapter 16 of John, Jesus said to his disciples, he actually told them some things that were going to happen to them, and it wasn't a pretty picture. After he left, he said, these things are going to happen to you too. But then he said these words that are so powerful for us. He said, in this world, you will have trouble. You will have trouble. Now, isn't that encouraging? In this world, you'll have trouble. But take heart, for I have overcome the world. And so when circumstances feel like they're so great and they're so difficult and there's no solution that seems present for us, we wait and we wait and we wait, and we don't even see a possibility of a resolution. We feel hopeless. But Jesus said, have hope. Take heart. I've already defeated the enemy. Have hope. And so there are times when we really truly need to mourn the sins in our life, the things that we know that we've done wrong, the turning away from God, the lack of trust that we have in him. And we do need to mourn that. And we need to confess those things. We need to let him show us those things. And that's part of this waiting period. That's part of growing stronger. That's part of letting God's Spirit make us into the people he created us to be. And just as my tomato plants are getting bigger and stronger and healthier and are going to be able to produce these fruits, that's what God does to us and with us in a waiting room. So we wait, we might even suffer. In fact, we often do. Waiting rooms have a way of doing that. But we can claim that hope that's ours. And so in closing, I want you to look with me at chapter 3 of Lamentations. I encourage you to look this up in your own Bibles and read this. You know, a good country western song could be written from the lines of chapter 3 of Lamentations. But at the end of his laments, and there are many laments, at the end of his laments, he says some astounding things, really. And let's read that together. He says, "So I say, my splendor is gone, and all that I had hoped from the Lord. I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet I call this to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him. To the one who seeks him, it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." Salvation means deliverance of the Lord. That little three-letter word, yet, I call this to mind. In spite of all of the laments I have, in spite of all my troubles, still in the midst of all of this, I remember. I remember God's graciousness, God's goodness, God's unfailing love. I remember that, and I have hope.